Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Karen Mintzer, and I'm a member of the New York City chapter of the New York League of Conservation Voters. The mission of the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund is to educate, engage, and empower New Yorkers to be effective advocates for the environment. We equip voters with information about climate and sustainability issues, and we encourage them to hold candidates accountable to their promises. This critical election season, we are also encouraging people to vote early for the environment. Early voting is easy and safe and allows for social distancing. It starts on Saturday, October 23rd and goes through Sunday, October 31st. And of course, Election Day is Tuesday, November 2nd. The 32nd City Council District is a coastal district and home to spectacular beaches and the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge. It is also a climate frontline community as it relates to sea level rise and the powerful storms caused by a changing climate. Coastal resiliency is a key concern as it impacts economic development, our quality of life, and our natural environment. Other challenges facing the district include public transportation, solid waste management, parks funding, environmental justice. We look forward to speaking with the candidates about these issues tonight. We are holding this forum to make sure that the environment is top of mind for candidates and voters. And I want to take a moment to thank the following partners who we rely on to help inform our policy agenda and priorities: the Waterfront Alliance, the Rise to Resilience Coalition, and the Regional Plan Association. Climate change is a continuous reminder that our actions affect the environment and what happens when we don't work to advocate for it. By being here, all of you are helping us send a message that New Yorkers care about having a healthy environment, a livable climate for future generations, and are paying attention during this election. Because this is a virtual forum, let me go over some ground rules before we start. This is a forum and not a debate, and as such, the candidates will be appearing separately and sequentially. We will be guided by a 2-minute rule, which is a limit for all candidate responses during the opening and closing statements and the question round. Our timekeeper, Caroline, will flash a yellow card when there are 30 seconds remaining and a red card when we're at time. Remember, these are the time limits and not suggestions, so we ask that the candidates keep their responses to a New York minute or two. Midway through the question period, we'll have a lightning round of questions that require very short responses. We'll also have time for audience and partner suggested questions, so please take a moment to submit your questions via the Q&A function by 5:30 p.m. After we conclude with our first candidate, we will hear from our second candidate and follow the same format using the same questions. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first candidate, Felicia Singh. Felicia Singh is a lifelong resident of Ozone Park and the proud daughter of 2 working-class immigrants. She's the first in her family to earn both a high school diploma and a college degree. Felicia is a former Peace Corps volunteer, having worked in China. She is a vice president of Our Neighbors Civic Association of Ozone Park and serves as Queens Borough Director of Amplify Her. Felicia was elected to serve as a member of Assembly District 23's County Committee, and in 2020, she served as a member of the Southeast Queens Complete Count Committee. Welcome, Felicia. Before we start with the questions, please take 2 minutes to introduce yourself to the audience, and at the end, you'll have 2 minutes to do a brief closing statement. I see Felicia's on camera now. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Felicia Singh. I am a teacher, daughter of working class immigrants, and your Democratic nominee for the 32nd City Council District. It is an honor to serve as the nominee because this is an incremental race. It's such an important one. You know, District 32 is an incredibly unique district. We have the beach, we have Jamaica Wildlife Refuge, we have Forest Park, we have diverse cultural foods and people. And then on the flip side, there are so many different inequities inequities that our communities face, especially when it comes to combating the climate crisis. Scientists say that we have at least 12 years left to really make incremental change in our city, in our states, in our country, in order to combat the climate crisis. And it's really what we do at the most local level that's going to impact not only our quality of life, but whether or not we're able to live in this district, considering that it's coastal. From those folks who are the most vulnerable on the Rockaway Peninsula and Howard Beach and Hamilton Beach to folks who live in Woodhaven, the conversation on the climate crisis is one that impacts all of us, no matter where you live. And as a candidate who considers myself as a climate candidate, the person who's been having conversations across the entire district on the crisis, it is time we take bold action and plans in building climate resilience here in this community. And I look forward to being the one to do it. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to my website at felicia2021.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Felicia. We'll just start with our first question. The first question is about coastal flooding. As sea levels rise and we see more frequent storms, flooding continues to put your community and people at risk. This is especially true in coastal areas such as District 32. How do you intend to tackle increased flooding and implement resiliency measures to protect coastal residents?
So there's a lot that we need to do. And the first thing that I want to make sure that we start to think about is how our city agencies work to communicate to combat flooding. The frank answer is that they don't. I want to be able to create an integrated plan coming into the city council. And what this integrated plan would do in order to fix infrastructure issues, in order to mitigate flooding on the ground, is mandate city agencies to talk to communities in which are deeply impacted by flooding. So you have the Mayor's Office of Resilience, you have the Department of Environmental Protection that might speak to one another, but don't necessarily have to, and they don't absolutely have to speak to community members on the ground when it comes to flooding or any kind of disaster that has to do with water or high sea level rising. So what we want to do is create an integrated plan that mandates the city agencies to speak to our community members. So we're creating infrastructure, we're creating plans on the ground for community members, and they have a stakehold in the decision-making process. That's number one. Number two, our weather report was just recently released that said that we actually need to now update building codes to include sea level rising. That's really important and has everything to do with flooding here in this coastal district. So we need to make sure that City Council is doing that. And the second that's been recommended is that City Council should then create an Office of Resiliency, and that would help focus points on coastal communities like ours, where we are impacted the most by flooding.
Okay, thanks, Felicia. We'll go to the next question, which is on transportation. Transportation Alternatives has proposed a plan to reclaim 25% of our streets for pedestrians by the year 2025. With a plan like this, we have the potential to drastically reduce pollution and congestion from automobiles while also providing more safer spaces for bikers, families, and pedestrians alike. If the city took on an initiative such as this, what changes would you most like to see in your district?
I would love to see more green spaces and more spaces in this district for folks who like to bike. I think that a lot of the times when we talk about bike lanes and we talk about protected bike lanes, we have folks who who use fear mongering for people who might lose parking spaces and parking in our community. But frankly, we should be able to have an equitable conversation about the fact that people bike throughout the district right now as it is, but it's actually unsafe. We need more protected bike lanes for our community members, and that really helps us reduce the congestion issue that we're having. Moving towards electric buses can help as well, but also navigating spaces that also are green, allow for people to spend more time in spaces that also are used as a way to soak up rainwater. You know, green spaces, bikes, protected bike lanes are two ways in which we can really help navigate congestion here in the city and in our district.
Thank you. The next question is about waste. Our aging combined sewers and sewer systems are often stressed by intensifying storms and increased flooding. If you're elected, how will you work to address this issue?
Our sewer system program is actually, it's really hard. It's also really difficult in our city because it takes federal funding, it takes city funding, it takes state level funding. We have an area in our community, in our district called The Hole. And The Hole is right at the end of District 32 and the beginning of District 37 in Brooklyn, East New York. And when I tell you people have been left abandoned without any sewer system at all in this area where people live and reside, it's been a neglected part of our district for the last 10, 12, 20 years. When people have to live with no sewage system, what ends up happening is flooding is more prominent in these areas. Folks are living and navigating their lives around large bodies of water that have now had algae grow on top. We have people who have septic tanks outside of their home. So when I think about really fixing infrastructure for sewer systems or any kind of drainage system at all, it's going to places in our district where people are living without them first. And that's my top priority.
Okay, we're going to take a break from our longer questions and go to the lightning round. I'm just going to remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Okay, do you compost?
Yes.
How do you normally like to travel around the city?
If I can, train or bus.
Do you carry reusable bags to the grocery store?
Yes.
Do you use a reusable water bottle?
I do.
What is your favorite park in District 32?
Ooh, I love Equity Park. It's a park it's a school park, but it's actually where a community member created a community library. So it's one of my favorite parks.
Okay, we'll go back to our longer questions. In terms of parks and open space, COVID-19 has underscored the need for quality open space and outdoor recreation. Waterfront open space and open space in general is unevenly available across the 5 boroughs. District 32 has some wide-ranging differences, from beaches in the southern portion to lack of green space in the northern section of the district. What are your concrete recommendations for addressing disparities in quality open space?
First, it's taking a look and essentially inventorying how our parks are treated and our green spaces are treated everywhere. You know, we have green spaces and parks here on the northern side of the district, or as folks on the peninsula say, the mainland of the district, where parks are really unkept. There's no trash can, it's overflowing. You don't have a basketball hoop, you don't have a space to walk. And then you have parts in the district where parks are really kept well. So it just really depends on what it looks like in terms of how we've been taking care of our current parks. And I also want to see a place where our community members are the ones who are in charge of really helping take care of our parks. You know, this could be a service, a job that our city employs people who live in our district to then take care of our parks and our green spaces. I think we have the opportunity here to rezone some of the waterfront areas of this district on the peninsula, and in rezoning them, making sure that they're community led for development, especially in areas where we have small businesses, where we can put affordable housing, but it's making sure that we have an environmental impact plan to make sure that we're also using we're having these green spaces, but they're going to be mitigators to the climate crisis as well.
Okay, this is a question on environmental justice. Historically, many neighborhoods have suffered from environmentally racist policies, from power plant siting to housing in the floodplain to industrial waste in communities and waterways. What are your concrete recommendations for policies that will turn the tide and provide climate just solutions to our city's most vulnerable populations?
Number one, when we think about environmental justice and we think about environmental racism, and then we look at the organizations and the folks who are in charge of creating policy plans to combat environmental racism and to promote environmental justice, they're not folks that look like me. They're not folks who are people of color. They're not predominantly our Black community members who are leading and creating plans. And the number one thing that our city can do citywide, and organizations like yours can do, is really make sure that we're supporting people of color who are talking about the environmental crisis, and propelling their stories, their plans, and really shedding light to them. When I went to the hole, the first thing I did was making sure that I spoke to community members who live there. They're folks who are Black, Spanish, and Bangladeshi who live at the hole and have felt completely forgotten. Our city legislator, no, not even our city legislators have been to the hole, because residents there say that nobody comes to visit them. No elected officials, no civic leaders. And when I think about that, it brings me deep sadness, because these are the folks who are on the ground who have been left out. When I called DEP and let them know about this situation, they said their hands are tied and that they're going to connect with DOT and bring the people there to talk about sewage and catch basins. Have they come yet? No. Is this on the front page of Queens Chronicle right now? Absolutely. And what I really want us to focus on is, like, we decide without them, and we leave them out, and we talk about justice. And now it's time to bring them into the conversation, make sure they're a part of our integrated plans for climate change, for adapting and mitigating the climate crisis, and do everything we can to protect our most vulnerable communities. But in protecting them, they need to be a part of creating plans that impact their life.
All right, thanks, Felicia. We're now going to go to some questions from the audience. The first question is, how would you encourage car dealers to sell more hybrid and EV vehicles and residents to purchase them?
I would say there's a large overall, when it comes to cars and the climate crisis, there is a large disconnect in educating community members, our auto industry, about how we could be more thoughtful in being mitigators and adapting to the climate crisis. Those conversations are not being had with automotive industries in promoting electronic cars or hybrid cars rather. And those conversations are also not happening with people who want to invest in buying automobiles right now. During the pandemic, we saw that there was a large increase it was a buyer's market. So many people purchased cars during the pandemic. Now we have a shortage on cars, and because of the shipment and how it gets here, but there's still a large demand. We don't really talk about why there's a large demand. We don't talk about how education plays a large role in teaching about hybrid options and what that could look like for people who own homes, or where you could have charging stations. So I would like to see a world in which we bridge that gap by teaching people about why investing in a hybrid car or hybrid transportation is so much more beneficial for our communities and our earth.
Okay, the next question from the audience is, what role do schools and education play in the fight against the climate crisis? And what programs would you fight for in schools regarding climate education?
That's a really good question, and thank you for asking it. Number one thing that I want everyone to realize is New Jersey is the first state to implement a climate crisis curriculum or a climate change curriculum in their schools, New Jersey. And I gotta say, that's impressive. We need to be a state that does the same thing. And what's really great about the curriculum is it's intersectional. They learn about the climate crisis or climate change in gym class, in health class. They learn about it in science class, and we need to be able to do that here. I would like to start a pilot program in New York City schools, if not New York City schools as a whole, but at least District 27 schools, where we start implementing conversations, lessons, curricula built on the climate crisis and climate change, where students are learning about it in science class, in health, they're learning about it at lunch, they're learning how to compost, we're investing in hydroponic gardens, we have students who are building community gardens. All of this takes funding. So when we look at our schools, we need to make sure that they remain fully funded so that all of our schools are equipped to navigate these conversations, build curriculum, have resources, and funding to build community gardens, and do that equitably across South Queens.
Okay, the next question is, Many people in our district drive because public transportation is so limited. What are your proposals for improving public transportation?
Well, first thing is that's important to note is our public transportation, the jurisdiction for city council in terms of public transportation is limited, but it's about pushing the governor because it's a state level, MTA is state level. What I can do and what I'm hoping to do is really talk about accessibility and the infrastructure of the current transportation pathways we have right now. For example, all of our train stations, we have 14 stations throughout this district, only 2 of them are accessible, only 2. That has everything to do with our environment because it's about how many people have access to other places throughout this district and throughout our city. We want to move to electric buses. We also need to think about how we can improve our express bus system. We have excellent local bus travel routes throughout this entire district, particularly in the mainland of the district. We can do that a lot better on the peninsula where people do depend on the cars. There's barely any parking. We need more express bus up and down the peninsula, potentially maybe even advocating for another ferry stop on the northern side of the peninsula. So we're picking up more people have access to different parts of the city. So these are the few ways that I'm hoping to really increase folks' reliance on public transportation. It's going to take a while. It's going to have to be a push. And there's a large education factor behind that too, where there's also a push here in this community for more parking.
Okay, the next question from the audience is, what are your thoughts on gas pipelines in our city?
We know that pipelines create more environmental racism and doesn't add to our fight towards justice. So I am against them, period.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions for you. This one is about congestion pricing. The MTA is currently in the process of holding public hearings on the Central Business District tolling program, which once implemented has the potential to reduce traffic congestion in our city, reduce emissions, and provide funding to the MTA. Do you support this program, and why or why not?
So I do support this program. And there's a nuance that not many people understand about this program, and it's impact on the medallion crisis right now for taxi drivers. There are a lot of taxis that are on the road right now that add to that congestion, absolutely. However, taxi drivers are unable to then pay the fees that add to congestion pricing throughout our city. So we are taking a lot of money from congestion pricing and bringing it to the MTA, and we need it to help mitigate this system, and it'll allow for congestion to reduce. The other side of that is the burden we're placing on working class people who then have to pay this amount whenever they drive throughout the city. So I'd like to see a space where we have congestion pricing, but maybe taxi drivers are omitted or owner drivers are omitted from paying it. New York Taxi Workers Alliance has a plan for this where we are still thinking about our environment and also taking care of our most working class who have to pay for it.
Okay, we've got another question about composting. A whopping 1/3 of our waste is organic material, and without a robust composting program, much of that waste is sent to landfills where it decomposes and emits harmful methane gas. Would you support a citywide composting mandate? And if so, how would you help to build out a robust system that includes all New Yorkers?
When the Commissioner of Sanitation put out their report on why composting was cut in the first place years ago, it was because there was a lack of education factor behind why composting impacts our climate and why it's so much more beneficial to practice every day in our homes. Everyone just got their brown bin at the door, got a leaflet that said how to compost and like what kind of scraps to put in that bin, and that's it. So some people had a chance to participate and learn on their own, and some people needed more. We didn't provide that something more. So in making sure we mandate composting and make people feel like they have an individual responsibility to curbing the climate crisis, we need to have a strong education factor behind that. Currently, you can sign up to compost on our city website, but that's you doing it as an individual on your own because you know it's important and you've had the tools to understand why. We need to give everyone those tools and start practicing composting actually publicly, where people can go to their park and compost or drop compost off, so that there's a transition, an equitable transition from being able to participate as an individual by signing up to a mandated by the city. I would like us to get to a place where everyone is participating, but there's a large education factor to it. And that's a role I hope to play here in this district, is teaching people why composting is so important and why they should be enrolling in this program in the meantime. But I will be pushing for hopefully mandating this across the city.
Okay, a question about green infrastructure. One of the most effective ways to protect ourselves from storms and flooding is with green infrastructure. Green infrastructure also has numerous other environmental benefits, including cleaning our air and mitigating the urban heat island effect. How would you ensure that green infrastructure is properly utilized in your district?
Well, first, we need to have a city council that believes in the fact that green infrastructure is worth spending on. Like, that's number one. We also need a mayor that believes that green infrastructure is worth investing in. Our mayor decides on our city budget, and our budget is a budget of values. So when we look line by line and we see how we include infrastructure, albeit green infrastructure, in our city budget, it's about how our mayor decides to spend money there. We need to push to start expensing and spending so much more on green infrastructure, on adaptation and mitigation to the climate crisis in our budget. And then we need to push to see how that's being spent across our city and in our boroughs, particularly parts of our boroughs and our city that are coastal areas. So that's the work that it takes to then really have an investment in green infrastructure in our city.
Another question on parks funding. The Department of Parks and Recreation is often underfunded and understaffed, receiving less than 1% of the New York City budget, while parks cover 14% of the land in New York City. If you are elected, will you fight for more funding in the parks budget? And what other actions will you take to improve the Parks Department and our green spaces?
Yes to fighting for more funding for our parks budget. The second thing we want to do is make sure that, one of the largest jurisdictions of city council is land use. So when we think about development, we want to make sure it includes green space. It's not developer-led, where private developers decide what green space looks like, who has access to green space. It pushes out small businesses. So we need to fight for that budget, absolutely, and I'm committed to doing that and increasing the New York City Parks budget, and also think about how we're developing on public land that's across our city to ensure that green spaces are public and that they're led by our communities in the decision-making process. And a lot of that has to do with changing the way our ULURP process is led as well.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, I think. New York City has 520 miles of waterfront and a significant amount in District 32. In the last 20 to 30 years, waterfronts have rapidly changed. Give one example of positive change you have seen along the waterfront in your district, and give one example of a shortcoming or negative aspect of New York City's 520 miles of waterfront.
I'm going to start with the latter. I think we have an opportunity potentially in on the peninsula, part of our district, where we could have waterfront that is developed by the community and small business owners who live in the district and own property on this waterfront already, and two, create a green space, and then three, create affordable housing up on the second floor of small businesses, which is great. The problem that we're seeing about this is the ULURP process gets in the way of that. And then you have different investors who want different things for the community. Right now, this waterfront could either be a Popeyes, a Starbucks, and a Burger King, which adds to our environmental crisis and environmental racism, where you only have really unhealthy foods available to you for folks who live within this area. Or it could be an area that's developed by small business owners who live in the district, want to add affordable housing and green space for this area. So it's really just up to our city. It's up to the people and the opportunity that we're giving community members to develop their own neighborhoods. So that's number one. And then to your second question, I think when I think about waterfront, I also think about who has access to them. So even though we have beautiful examples of waterfront areas across this on the peninsula, there's opportunity and on the mainland for people who to have more access to them, and that's through our public transportation options and our bike pathway options as well.
Okay, we got another question from the audience. So I'm going to ask that, and then we'll let you have 2 minutes for closing. In our city and our district, street trees are abundant in relatively wealthy areas and scarce in working class areas. What would you do to make sure all of our district and city got the benefit of beautiful air cleaning and heat reducing street trees?
Well, one, we need to make sure that we're planting more trees. And then two, we're not taking care of our trees equitably across the district either. There's been so many reports of community members who have been filing reports on 311 to have trees taken care of, trimmed, making sure that they're not falling over. Whenever we have storms similar to what we saw in Hurricane Ida that knock down trees and branches, that's dangerous, not only for our environment, for people living in their communities who now then have to fix their homes because of fallen trees that could have been trimmed and taken care of by our city, fallen power lines, as well as just branches that are falling straight onto the floor while people are walking. So we need to, number one, plant more trees, but two, really think about how we're taking care of the trees that we have right now. Every time we have a storm, we lose more. So how are we creating systems where we're planting more trees and taking care of the ones that are still standing within our communities? Including green space, we need to make sure we have a plan for putting trees in those spaces as well. We have rain gardens throughout this entire district, which is really exciting. Rain gardens are also inequitably taken care of throughout the community. Some have a lot of trash in them and people are throwing trash because they don't know what a rain garden is. And then some have trees already planted there. So it's really just about, again, an education factor, advocacy, and how our city systems work to then help take care of us.
Well, thanks for answering all these questions, Felicia. Now we'll give you 2 minutes to give a closing statement.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your questions, for listening and staying so very much engaged. It's an honor to be here again to your organization and have and be able to share about my climate plan and where I stand when it comes to mitigating the climate crisis. We are in incremental time in this race. We're running in the last Republican district in Queens. When I think about the last 12 years in my community, it's been one of deep erasure and isolation because we haven't had funding. We haven't had the resources we need to thrive. We have 100, when you think about this district and how massive it is, we have only 158 trash cans in this entire district, 158. We're also dealing with a environmental racism in parts of our district that have been completely neglected and have no sewage system, and people rely on septic tanks and have to navigate pools of water that have algae growing on top in order to get to and from work. We have areas within this community called Woodhaven, where people have an increased amount of air pollution that they're breathing into their lungs, and damage, and these pockets of pollution are giving the folks asthma or any heat related health issue. So when we talk about the climate crisis and when we talk about conservation, we need to think about the fact that this is a conversation for everyone, whether you're close to the coast or you're not. And if we're not having that conversation in language, if we're not having that conversation across the community, then who are we really helping? I am the candidate to back in this race because I've been doing this work in talking and sharing and teaching our community members for a very long time. And in doing that, I've heard stories of struggle. I am the candidate to take those stories of struggle and make them stories of change. And I could do that with your vote by November 2nd. Early voting starts October 23rd. It's been a pleasure. You can learn more about me at Felicia2021.com.
Thanks, Felicia.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce our second candidate, Joanne Areola. Wait for her to join.
I'm trying to unlock the video, but it won't allow me. It said the host has stopped it. Okay, here we go. Here I am.
There you are. So Joanne Ariola is a longtime Queens civic leader, wife, mother, and grandmother. Joanne's community involvement began with her service as a board member for her Children's Parents Association. She has also served as the president of the Howard Beach Lindenwood Civic Association and as a member of Community Board 10. She is active in promoting Build the Block initiative meetings with the New York Police Department neighborhood coordination officers and participates in NYPD meet and greets. Joanne is also active in organizations that collect toys and supplies for those in need, which are donated to families of domestic violence and local family shelters. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to your entire team for putting this together.
So before we start with questions, you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself to the audience, and at the end, you'll have another 2 minutes for a brief closing statement.
Okay, thank you. As you mentioned, I am the president of the Howard Beach Lindenwood Civic Association, and I'm a member of Community Board 10. I've been involved with hundreds of cleanups and beautification projects throughout this district. Additionally, I'm an appointed member for the New York State New York Rising Committee and work collaboratively to develop projects throughout the district, which, if fully funded and advanced, would ensure better climate resiliency in this portion of the district where I live. I also have a familiarity with the Rockaway New York State Rising Committee, and I believe that makes me a better prepared person to work in the City Council. In my capacity as a Queens civic advocate, I have served on the Borough President's Hurricane Task Force and worked on issues related to Hurricane Sandy, and have participated in other forums regarding environmental issues on a number of topics. In my capacity as a community board member, that's Community Board 10, I've also worked with my colleagues on resiliency, environmental, and other issues that have both long and short-term impacts.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. We'll start with our first question. First question is about coastal flooding. As sea levels rise and we see more frequent storms, flooding continues to put communities and people at risk. This is especially true in coastal areas such as District 32. How do you intend to tackle increased flooding and implement resiliency measures to protect coastal residents?
So the 32nd Council District is a shore community, as you mentioned, both ocean and bay, and there are hundreds of acres of natural space on the mainland as well, you know, as on the peninsula. As a civic association president and as a community board member, we supported the New York Rising Committee, and we supported the Forever Wild improvement to Spring Creek, and that is a 300-acre natural habitat that really has wonderful wildlife, and it's a wonderful sanctuary. And I invite anybody to just take a walk through one day. Is absolutely stunning. I will always work towards reasonable development. We have 300 acres, as I mentioned, of undeveloped parkland, and it acts as a buffer for the Howard Beach community for hurricanes and sustainability to thwart any type of hurricane damage and devastation like we found with Sandy. I believe that we have as a group, whether it's New York Rising, the Hurricane Task Force, I'm so proud to be part of it, because through those initiatives, through those groups, we have been able to bring about initiatives through working with our Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, working with our state legislators, working with our city council legislators to make sure that we realized, resiliency on the Rockaway Peninsula, whether it's the groins that are being put in, or the reinforced dunes, or in Howard Beach, the berm that's up on the Spring Creek Preserve. These are measures that I would like to continue, that I would like to fight for as a city council member.
Okay, the next question is on transportation. Transportation Alternatives has proposed a plan to reclaim 25% of our streets for pedestrians by the year 2025. With a plan like this, we have the potential to drastically reduce pollution and congestion from automobiles while also providing more safer spaces for bikers, families, and pedestrians alike. If the city took on an initiative such as this, what changes would you most like to see in your district?
So in my district, I've worked closely with the MTA and with the DOT regarding bike lanes, regarding bus lanes, and also was very instrumental in the protected bike lane that is coming down 165th Avenue in Howard Beach that connects the bike lane from Spring Creek all the way to the Cross Bay Bridge through Broad Channel. And that was a big project for us, because we wanted protective bike lanes. We wanted people to be able to come, throughout the district and go and enjoy the wonderful shoreline in the Rockaways and be able to do that via bike. I've also been very involved with the ferry from the very beginning to try and get the ferry service down on the Rockaway Peninsula. We have, in fact, I was down there this morning, and I do believe that it should be expanded, because it does really help lessen the cars that are on the road, lessen the emissions that are damaging our climate, and I believe that those measures can help our climate be saved.
Okay, next question. Our aging sewer systems are often stressed by intensifying storms and increased flooding. If you're elected, how will you work to address this issue?
The very first thing I would have to do is I would work with DEP, the commissioner, the city council, whoever the mayor happens to be, to make sure that there's funding allocated for infrastructure. There are areas in Rockaway that sewer lines are shared, both storm and household, and that's why they get backups the way they do. That's happening also in the other communities where there's not enough maintenance in the sewers, to clean out our catch basins. Just what happened with Hurricane Ida, because we had such a large amount of rain that came at such a short period of time. The reason for that why it backed up so terribly was because a lot of the catch basins were unable to handle the volume because they're stuffed with leaves and garbage. So what we need is better infrastructure, more sewer projects. There's one that's going on in the Rockaways right now. It's a 2-year project. It will help alleviate that problem there. I'd like to see that happen throughout the district, and absolutely more maintenance to the sewers that are already there in our catch basins. It is key to stop flooding within our homes.
And we're gonna take a pause and go to the lightning round.
Okay.
Do you compost?
Yes.
How do you normally like to travel around the city?
Well, I live in what's considered a transportation desert, so I do use my vehicle, but when I can, I love to ride my bike, and taking the ferry is an amazing experience. I recommend it.
Do you carry reusable bags to the grocery store?
Yes.
Do you use a reusable water bottle?
I do.
What park is your favorite one in District 32?
Well, not many people know it is a park, but the shoreline of the Rockaway beaches is a city park, and that is the most beautiful park you will ever visit.
Okay, I'm going to go back to our longer questions. In terms of parks and open space, COVID-19 has underscored the need for quality open space and outdoor recreation. Waterfront open space and open space in general is unevenly available across the 5 boroughs. District 32 has some wide-ranging differences from beaches in the southern portion to lack of green space in the northern section of the district. What are your concrete recommendations for addressing disparities in quality open space?
So what I've done as a civic leader and a member of Community Board 10 is work to really lobby our city council members and our state officials for funding to put into our parks. Right now we have a local playground that we're having redone, and it'll be the first playground in the district that has swings for children with disabilities, and I'm very proud of that. I've also worked on beautification locations. There is a roundabout in Lindenwood that we have a magnificent piece of artwork that has wonderful greenery, and it is absolutely stunning. And to be involved with projects like that really mean a lot to me. On the Rockaway Peninsula, I was very involved in getting the funding necessary for a learning garden at the Scholars Academy, so the children can learn from planting the seed all the way, to seeing something that's grown. And we worked with the Queen's Botanical Garden on the roundabout project, as well as the Scholars Academy. So I would like to just continue in that vein. I'm doing the work. I've done, have projects that I've been involved in, and sitting at the city council, I can make sure that we realize even more projects for the district.
Okay, and just a reminder that if there are questions from the audience, please put them in the Q&A. So the next question's about environmental justice. Historically, many neighborhoods have suffered from environmentally racist policies, from power plant siting to housing in the floodplain to industrial waste in communities and waterways. What are your concrete recommendations for policies that will turn the tide and provide climate just solutions to our city's most vulnerable populations?
Well, coming from a community that was devastated by Hurricane Sandy, my family home was devastated. The home that I reside in was impacted by it. I understand the need for projects to make sure that we are equally covered for resiliency and for lack of flooding, right? So what I believe is that generally what we should do is go back to the infrastructure. Let's go back to making sure our sewers are cleaned, maintained, and new sewer projects are brought in. We did through New York Rising and the Hurricane Task Force, we made recommendations for raising streets. So streets throughout Broad Channel have been raised, so that mitigated the flooding there, and they were quite happy with that. And that's going to continue throughout other streets that have been impacted by the fact that they were at a lower grade of sea level. So, and again, down in the Rockaways, the dunes and the groins. So I believe that there were and continue to be, a lack of environmental justice in different portions of the district, but we are really working collaboratively with our elected officials, with our community board, with our civic associations to make sure that each community is addressed and gets what they need. Some communities are a little more challenging than others. My opponent mentioned the area in Howard Beach that she referred to that is at a lower grade level. That is something that needs to be addressed, but absolutely, I believe that people who live in any area should be able to live there without being flooded out.
Okay, I'm going to go to some of the audience questions now. This question went to Felicia Singh. How would you encourage car dealers to sell more hybrid and EV vehicles and residents to purchase them?
I think that people are really getting the message about hybrid vehicles. I think that, they're going for smaller vehicles. They're going for crossovers instead of, larger SUVs. I think that they're is, you know, more stations for electric cars, and I really like to see that change. I really do. But what I really also like to see is that the city and the state get involved in that and provide funding so that it would be more affordable for people to make that change. Maybe that they're unable to afford to make the change, you know, or they've had a car for 25 years and they're unable to buy a new car. So I'd like to see the city get involved with that, and I think that, you know, that could help promote it. I think that is the way of the future. I think that's the way we're going, and I think that people are much more open to it than they were maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and they realize that they're not losing anything by not having a gas-driven car or a diesel-driven truck or bus, and that, you know, more energy efficient, you know, alternatives can be just, you know, work just as well. But I do think the city and state need to get involved and provide some type of funding.
Okay, new question from the audience. This is there's an interesting proposal out there for a new rails to trails park called the Queensway that would run through the district. Ozone Park especially could use new green space plus safe cycling and easy access to Forest Park. The district is not getting its fair share in terms of parks investments. Would you support this effort? Yes,
I was involved originally when it was the LIRR, and they just wanted to make it the railway to Rockaway. The Queensway is a wonderful combination of putting, you know, additional resources into transportation to the Rockaway Peninsula, to and from, and for the people who live there. And the green space is just, I think that it would be a wonderful addition to the community. I absolutely support it.
Okay, another question from the audience. What role do schools and education play in the fight against the climate crisis? What programs do you fight for in schools about climate education?
I think they play a very important role. I think that children need to know from the beginning. I think it begins at home as well, when they see their parents composting and recycling and using you know, not paper bags, you know, bags that they bring to the grocer and bring home with them, so that we don't have an abundance of plastic bags. I think that really is a beginning, and I think that's begun in schools. That's why it was so important for me to make sure that the garden at the Scholars Academy was a learning garden, so that they could understand that. Additionally, we have in Broad Channel, it's called Sunset Cove. It is an absolute gem. It is a combination of marshland and oyster beds. It has really helped to cleanse the waters over in Jamaica Bay, which has been a focus of my civic association, is working with the Jamaica Bay Eco Watchers and you know, and people who are over in Broad Channel, make sure that Jamaica Bay remains clean. But what's going to happen is, I was just out there the other day, there has been funding appropriated by the government to build a boardwalk that will go all the way out to the water, and it will be a learning experience for the children about how important it is to keep our waterways clean and to make sure that we have marshes, so that we can have the water and the life in the water that we so desperately need. And I mean, look, you go to the beach now, you're seeing dolphins and you're seeing sea lions, and that's all because of the hard work that we've put in since Hurricane Sandy, and before that, to make sure that our community was resilient. You're muted.
Good, sorry.
Yes, that's okay.
I knew that would happen once during this forum. Many people in our district drive because public transportation is so limited. What are your proposals for improving public transportation?
What I think we should do with public transportation is that, like I said earlier, I've been over at campaigning at the train stations. So when people speak to me, I say, what matters most to you? So they want a safe, you know, experience. They want a reliable experience, and they want more accessibility for people with disabilities. My opponent mentioned there were two train stations that were accessible to people with disabilities. I'm very proud to say that my colleagues and I on Community Board 10 fought for those two train stations. One is the Aqueduct train station, and the other is the Howard Beach A train the air train station, and they both have elevators and they are handicapped accessible. I'd like to see every single train station handicapped accessible to people with disabilities, to make sure that everyone can travel this city, you know, comfortably and safely. In addition, I do believe that we can look at other stops for the ferry service where they can pick up along the peninsula and you know, and take them to different parts of Manhattan. So this way, you know, people who are at different points in Manhattan, work at different points in Manhattan, can use that. Additional buses that we can, you know, that are, I've lost the term for it. Express buses, there it is. More express buses, more accessibility for express buses to go, you know, to where people have to go. I mean, we live in really, when I say a transportation desert, it truly is. There are very few ways to travel in and out of District 32 if you don't have a car. I'd like to see that change.
So a somewhat related question for you. The MTA is currently in the process of holding public hearings on the Central Business District tolling program, which once implemented has the potential to reduce traffic congestion in our city, reduce emissions, and provide funding to the MTA. Do you support this program? Why or why not?
I support it in its concept, but again, at the end of the day, I have to represent the people of the district in District 32. And as I mentioned before, it is very difficult to travel to and from without a vehicle. I think that for people, especially in the borough of Queens and the 32nd Council District, it would be almost unaffordable for them to go into the city and use their cars and be further taxed to go into the city. So I think that it has to be looked at a project by project basis. So although, you know, in its concept, it sounds good, but for this particular district, I think it would be an additional burden to the people who live here.
Okay, another question from the audience. What are your thoughts on proposed fracking gas pipelines in our city?
So we have out in Jamaica Bay, we have the Wilson pipeline, and that's a real, that's a big, you know, conversation starter. So right now they're not fracking, they're not extending the Wilson pipeline. But what I will do is, no matter what happens within the district, whether it's pipelines, fracking, windmills, no matter what the issue is, it has to have community support. That is the most important thing. All the things we spoke about today and all the things that I said that have already been implemented had widespread community support. So at the end of the day, on those issues, I would listen to the community. I'm not there to promote my own agenda. I'm there to promote the constituents' needs and their wants for the district.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. In our city and our district, street trees are abundant in relatively wealthy areas and scarce in working class areas. What would you do to make sure all of our district and city got the benefit of beautiful air cleaning and heat reducing street trees?
So Community Board 10 is a tireless advocate for planting trees. We planted hundreds of trees throughout the Ozone Park portion of the district and into the Howard Beach portion of the district. These will all help with heat mitigation and also clean air. It was very important, especially after the devastation of Hurricane Sandy, when all trees, most trees, were destroyed, that we made that a priority of the board to make sure there was funding to Parks Department to replant those trees that were either knocked over or removed or devastated through Hurricane Sandy. And it was quite a number, it was hundreds of trees. It is extremely important.
Okay, a question about composting. A whopping 1/3 of our waste is organic material, and without a robust composting program, much of that waste is sent to landfills where it decomposes and emits harmful methane gas. Would you support a citywide composting mandate? And if so, how would you help to build out a robust system that includes all New Yorkers?
When the Department of Sanitation first came with the proposal for composting, our community board and our civic association was extremely, extremely supportive of it and remains supportive of it. We worked very closely with the Department of Sanitation to put out the flyers, educate, hold meetings, have Department of Sanitation come down, explain to community members what they do with the green, with the brown container. And I see a lot of members of our community are still using that, even though it's not mandated, they are using that. And I think that with further education, they would understand that composting is very important, because we don't need it to go to landfills and we don't need it to further destroy our environment. Years ago, there was the Fountain Avenue dump not so far from the Howard Beach community. And we fought very hard to make sure that closed down. So this district, the 32nd Council District, honestly, doesn't need mandate. They are already in. They recycle, they compost, they understand about our waterways, they understand about the need to be kind to our environment, and and I applaud them for that. And I think that's because we as community leaders throughout the district have really made it our mission to educate them on the reasons why. Because really, when people resist something, it's because they're not fully aware of, one, how to do it, right? So we gave education on how to do it. And the other is really why. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do another thing? But once they realize why and how important it is, they really are amenable to doing it. So I'm happy to be part of this district.
Okay, question on buses. Buses are a critical component of New York City's transportation network. What improvements would you like to see when it comes to District 32's buses? And how will you fight for buses if you are elected?
So we just had an issue where we fought the MTA on removing the Q53, and we won. So the Q53 is still now coming from up through, from Elmhurst all the way through Howard Beach, through the entire district. And why did we do that? Because many of the people who come to work throughout this district use the Q53. Many of the children who go to school in the Rockaways from the mainland use the Q53. What I'd like to see is more Q53s, because so many people do use them. They're really utilized, and I couldn't understand why the MTA was going to try and remove it. But we do have bus lanes, and I was part of the bus lane committee, and we used to go to the meetings, MTA and the DOT. We worked very closely with them to make sure that the bus lanes were both functional, and they were not obtrusive to our small businesses. What I would like to see is buses remaining in the bus lane so that we can share the road better. And I would work towards that, because we want to see bikes on the road, we want to see buses on the road, but we also have vehicles on the road, and we have to learn how to cohabitate on the road and do that safely. So I think I would really focus on education for safely traversing our streets when bicycles, buses, and cars, vehicles are on that road. But I've been an advocate for more bus service to our district so that it is no longer considered a desert for transportation.
Okay, another question. One of the most effective ways to protect ourselves from storms and flooding is with green infrastructure. Green infrastructure also has numerous other environmental benefits, including cleaning our air and mitigating the urban heat island effect. How would you ensure that green infrastructure is properly utilized in your district?
So I'll go back to the projects that we discussed before, like Sunset Cove, like Spring Creek, and those are soft infrastructure that we put into place. The more hard infrastructure are the 15 groins and the four rehab groins that are going in the Rockaway Peninsula, and that project is almost complete. And also the strengthening of the dunes along the Rockaway Peninsula, and most importantly is the renourishment of the sand at the beach. So those are all projects that I've currently been involved in, and I would like to see that expanded, and so that we are safe from any future storms.
And this is a question about city park funding. The Department of Parks and Recreation is often underfunded and understaffed, receiving less than 1% of the New York City budget, while parks cover 14% of the land in New York City. If you're elected, will you fight for more funding in the parks budget? What other actions would you take to improve the Parks Department and our green spaces?
I would absolutely fight for more funding. Oftentimes when there's a budget cut, Parks Department is the first one to realize that cut, unfortunately. So what I would like to do is be on the Parks Committee, because we have so many beautiful parks, both city and federal throughout this district, and make sure that I had a strong voice to make sure we got funding to improve our parks, and for parks that need to be redone to make sure that we can redo those parks. Like I said, the park in our district that is going to be completely redone and put in the new swings for children with disabilities. But also the other thing we thought about with that park, which I thought was really important, was that the children's portion of the park, for toddlers, is going to have a barrier so that the older kids who are playing basketball and something gets by them, that the little guys don't get trampled. So we try to think of every issue that we can to make sure that everyone can go enjoy the park, but everyone can be safe while they're in the park. And I want to see more pop-up, beautification sites throughout this district, like we have at the Lindenwood Roundabout. It caused such conversation when it was first put up, but it's absolutely grown on everyone through the district. I'd like to see more parks like Sunset Park, where we can teach our children about the environment. And I'd like to see every school have a learning garden. I mean, that particular garden at the Scholars Academy was headed up by Mr. Bradley. It was a passion of his. He continues to work with the children. I see them in the morning and I see the children out there, and they're learning. They're learning not just about the environment, but about responsibility and things like that. So and working together.
Okay, another question about the waterfront. New York City has 520 miles of waterfront and a significant amount in District 32. In the last 20 to 30 years, waterfronts have rapidly changed. Give one example of a positive change you've seen along the waterfront in your district, and give one example of a shortcoming or negative aspect of New York City's 520 miles of waterfront.
So the positive changes that I've seen are the implementation of the groins, the implementation of the dunes, the renourishment of the sand at the beach so that we have more beach, more park beach property before the water. And so I think that that's very important. The maintenance of the beach, the maintenance of the boardwalk, and that again comes to parks funding, where there are a lot of community groups that do it, but the onus is on the agency. If community groups want to clean up a beach or clean up an area throughout the district, that is absolutely wonderful, but it shouldn't be their job. The agency should be held accountable for what they need to do. The negative part of it is that I would like to see more community input when deciding on what's happening, along that beachfront.
Okay, are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, if there are no more questions, I'd like to give Joanne 2 minutes to make a closing statement.
So what I'd like to just say is that, as a person who lives in the 32nd Council District and who has had a childhood home, as I mentioned before, and my current home impacted by Hurricane Sandy, I have personal experience with the effects of climate change. And while my opponent talks about climate change and in very generic ways, I have actually done work. I've implemented, I've had a say, I've worked with the elected officials. The projects that I mentioned throughout this, this forum, they're real. You can go see them. They're not something I'd like to do. It's something that I have done, and I'm very proud of that. I want to make sure that more projects like that continue throughout the district, and that we no longer have any type of, environmental racism. It goes throughout the district, raising streets, raising the grade of areas like the Hole, so that they can have sewers. At this point, the area is the water table is so low that they're unable to. I'd like to see every single portion of this district realize whatever they need to make sure that they can live comfortably within their community. I've done the work. I want to continue to do the work. I think that I am the best equipped for that because as a person who resides in the area and the district that was devastated, I have a personal interest in making sure that the district is resilient, because I don't want to have to move. I don't want my family to have to move. And I don't want my neighbors to have such exorbitant flood rates for flood insurance that they cannot afford to stay there. And for those reasons and so many more, I have the experience, the knowledge, the relationships, and I've already done so much of the hard work. I just want to be able to get to City Hall, continue that hard work for the constituents in the 32nd Council District. My name is Joanne Areola. You can read about me at joannareola.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you to both of the candidates and all of you for being here tonight. We hope that you learned a few new things about the environment and about our candidates. If you tuned in late and you want to rewatch, this video will be on our Facebook page at facebook.com/New York or NYLCV, and on our YouTube page at youtube.com/NYLCV. Most importantly, be sure to vote. Take our pledge to vote early. Early voting starts on October 23rd, and Election Day is November 2nd. Follow us on @NYLCV on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for updates. If you're not already on our email list, sign up at www.nylcv.org. And thank you all, and stay safe, healthy, and enjoy the evening.